Hi, my name is Ken Wright. This is the last of the 6 presentations on the mystery of light. This presentation concerns an experiment that is considered by most scientists to be the most paradoxical element of quantum mechanics, the double-slit experiment. Richard Feynman, a leading scientist of the last century and Nobel Prize winner in theoretical physics, had this to say about the double-slit experiment. Do not keep saying to yourself if you can possibly avoid it, but how can it be like that? Because you will get down the drain into a blind alley from which nobody has yet escaped. Nobody knows how it can be like that. Well, before we get into the details of this experiment, we need to talk for a moment about wave interference. This is a transverse wave or sine wave. If we put 2 of these waves coming together, and they happen to be in phase, which means that their peaks and valleys match up, they are said to be constructive waveforms. It is like adding 1 plus 1 equals 2. The resulting wave is double in size. If there are 2 out-of-phase waves coming together, or in other words, the peaks of one are lining up with the valleys of the other, this is destructive interference. It is like adding 1 minus 1 equals 0. The resulting wave is flat. Okay, with this bit of information, let's look at the double-slit experiment. We have a light source which shines a light beam through a slit on a metal plate. The light coming through the slit fans out in waveform and shines through 2 slits in a second metal plate. The light coming through the 2 slits fan out in 2 wave patterns that overlap with each other, causing wave interference, like we just finished talking about. The interference pattern is recorded on a photographic plate, and where there is constructive interference, we have tiny specks of light that are recorded on the plate. Where there is destructive interference, no specks of light are recorded. But the problem with this is that waves which are big and spread out cannot produce tiny little light specks on a photographic plate. It has to be tiny little particles that do this, like photons. But how can these tiny little photons interfere with each other? It has to be waves that do this. Well, since there can't be both waves and photons at the same time, at least not according to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which, by the way, is the most mainstream interpretation, when do the waves collapse into photons? Well, let's suppose it is photons that are being fired, just for discussion purposes. And let's fire just 1 photon at a time. There shouldn't be any interference pattern because there won't be anything to interfere with. But we'll do a time lapse on the photographic screen just to make sure. Oh no. It looks like we're getting the same interference pattern. This is impossible. Where is the interference coming from? Well, as Richard Feynman said, nobody knows how it can be like that. Well, Richard, you may have been wrong. David BOHM came very close to a solution. In fact, his solution is pretty sound. He was one of the great thinkers in quantum theory. And he came up with a solution which now is known as BOHM mechanics, and is based on a pilot wave theory. So whatever has happened to BOHM mechanics, This from Stanford.edu. Bohmian mechanics has never been widely accepted in the mainstream of the physics community. Many physicists, probably the majority, are simply unfamiliar with the theory and how it works. Well, imagine that. Sometimes the theory is rejected without explicit discussion of the reasons for rejection. Wow, that sure sounds like mainstream theory to me. Well, here's how the double-slit experiment works under Bohmian mechanics. Particles are fired from the light source, but each particle is preceded by a pilot wave. Whereas the particles go through one or the other slit, the pilot wave goes through both slits, which sets up an interference pattern. And that interference pattern guides the particles to the photographic screen, giving the appearance of interference. The only question here is, what is the pilot wave? Well, David had his interpretation of that, and I have mine, and here it is. This is a photograph of a bullet. There is a bow wave of air that kind of wraps around the bullet. Because air is not very dense, the bow wave would never make it through both slits ahead of the bullet. But suppose that there is a bow wave way out in front of the bullet. Maybe it's the quantum vacuum, which is a plenum of substance and energy. If you watch the third presentation on zero-point energy and the vacuum of space, we all know it's out there. This vacuum is very dense, and there could be a Bohmian pilot wave way out in front of a bullet or a subatomic particle or anything else that's plowing through the vacuum of space. I propose that the quantum vacuum is a feature of a spiritual light that fills all space and is in and through all things. And that this light is a pilot that guides and directs all of God's creations and is the power of all creation that enlightens our eyes and inspires our minds and hearts, that fills the immensity of space, that is in all things and gives life to all things, that is the law that governs all things, even the power of God, who is in the midst of all things.